Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about database relationships. So we're done with the movie app that we've been working on examples with. For this episode and the following one, we're going to use this new server that I just built that doesn't have a front end. We're going to do all the testing in Postman. So really basic server setup here, nothing new. We are connected through Mongoose, and I have named a new database here, just DB methods. And my error handler and the app.listen at the end are identical. The only difference here are the models and routes we'll be using. So we're going to simulate a database relationship. So let's recall what those are. What are the three types of main database relationships do we have? We have a one-to-one, we have a one-to-many, and we have a many-to-many. So while books and authors could technically fall into either of these two categories, some books are written by many authors. We're going to stick to books that just have one author to simulate a one-to-many. How do we create a author and a book in our database and have them know that they belong to one another, or at least show or look like they belong to one another? Okay, so let's check out the models and see what our starting point is. In my models, I have the book. Right now, the book schema just equates for a title. And for the next lesson, we're going to talk about likes as well. How do we do that kind of functionality? But let's focus on this. So just title and likes for now in the book. Both are required. One's a string, one's a number. And on the author, we just have a name, type string required true. So that model is author. This model is book. With that, I have created two route files. So I have the author router that has a get all authors and add new authors. And then I literally copied and pasted this to book router and just changed the word author to book. So get all books, add new book. That's all we're really going to need to simulate this and get some practice. So if you'd like to follow along, feel free to, kind of pause it, get these routes, go ahead and get these routes, get the author schema, and get the book schema. Okay, and we should be good to go. Back to the server. We have these two endpoints, books and authors. Okay, so when we're relating data in MongoDB, you may recall from the very first database episode we did on database introductions, there's something called an object ID that we use with MongoDB. So in a one-to-many relationship, book to author, which one is the one and which one is the many? Right, so you're probably thinking, hopefully, author is the one, book is the many. An author may have many books they've written, but in the world that we're covering right now, books only ever have one author. So here's the one, here's the many. And a nice rule to live by when a one-to-many relationship comes up in a MongoDB or non-relational database is give the ID of the one to the many. So every book needs to know which author they belong to, but the author doesn't need to know which books they've written. We already have that relationship declared on the book, so we should be fine, unless there's a need. Unless we need to find an author for a specific purpose and all their books, but typically we'd be fine getting away with just putting the ID of the author on the book. So we're going to add a little bit to the schema here to account for that. We're going to say the book needs an author property. Again, this does not need to be named anything in particular, but it's going to represent the ID of an author in our database. So I'm going to call it author. Now the type for this, the first part that's different is the type. It's not a string or a number, even though it will technically kind of look like that. It's a specific schema type. So we're going to say schema, using this schema word, schema.types, capital T, dot object ID. You may have noticed there before I typed the O, schema.types will show you all the different types that MongoDB supports. Object ID is on here, and that means we're relating or referencing another object in our database by its ID. Great. Well, Mongoose asks for one thing more. It wants to know which model is this ID belonging to. So we use an ref or a reference, and then reference the string name of that model. So this model's book, the author is author, so it needs that string. So I'm going to say author. And then lastly, I don't want any books saved in my database without an author, so I'm going to make that required. Okay, so every book, when it's being saved, needs an author it's saved to. However, this is not the author's name, and typically this won't be something the user is giving you. This is something going on behind the scenes. This will be the ID of an existing author. So before we add any books, we need to go make a post request and create our first author. All right, so let's go do that in Postman. I have my localhost 9000 to authors here. I'm going to do a post request of raw JSON and give them a name. I'm just going to make up some books here. So here's Joe Schmo. That's all we need for the author. So we'll post him. And oh no, quick error here. So it looks like if you copied my code, if you come to the author router, right here where I say new author equals a new author, this was not capitalized, causing it to break, but that'll fix it. So let's go ahead now and add Joe Schmo. We'll hit send. There we go. So we have our first author. Here is his ID. So this is what needs to be saved on whichever book we post for Joe Schmo. Well, how are we going to send that ID? There's a few different ways, and we get to choose, but let's go ahead and look at our book router, because this is where it's going to happen in the post. When the book is created, the user won't be sending us the ID of the author typically. Maybe they will be, but really this is something we're doing for them. We're putting it in their URL. So that needs to be added to the request body before we create a new book from it. So how are we going to get the ID of that author? Well, we could make the post request to book router be /post/author ID. So we're sending the ID of the author whom belongs this book. And this is one way we could do it. We could also do it as a query string. We could also send it in request body. But we're going to do it as a parameter here, just for example. All right, so let's see here. If we console.log rec.params, and let's send a post request to book router with that author's ID. So I will grab their ID. I'll go to books, and I'll put the ID here. And just to make sure nothing gets saved, I'm going to comment this out, just so we can see this console log. All right, so I'll send post, nothing comes back. But sure enough, we received the author ID we were expecting. That is the author that wrote this new book that we're adding to the database. So all we need to do is add that to this request body object before we save it, and we should be good. Again, we're calling this author, so that's the property of the object we need to save it as. So here, I will say rec.body.author. The user sent me a title. I'm going to add a .author to it and say it's equal to the rec.params.author ID. Then I'm creating the new book from it, and then I'm saving it. So now this should be related to the author that wrote it. So let's try that out. We're going to post request to the books, and we're going to say the history of Joe, and post this new book with Joe Schmo's ID. Book validation failed. Title. Oops. Name is for author. Title is for book. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so author, ID of Joe Schmo. Then what is this ID? Well, that's the ID of the book, the history of Joe. So let's add one more book for Joe here. And now Joe has 2 books. For the sake of practice, we're going to add one more author. So author, we'll give them a name, and we'll call this author Nancy. Nancy's the new author. All right, so let's grab Nancy's ID. Let's do a post request to books and add some of Nancy's books. So title, Nancy's history. Send. All right, Nancy's first book. And might as well add a part 2 to this. Everyone loves sequels. And Nancy's history part 2. All right, so right now, if we were to do a GET request to books, what we're going to see? What are we going to see? We're going to see a collection of 4 books, seemingly all in the same stack, right? They do all have an author, and these IDs are the same, and then these 2 IDs are the same. But we've created something really cool here. As long as we know the author's ID when we're doing a query, we can say go find all books whose author matches this specific ID number, and that'll pull us a sub-collection. It will get us all the books written by a specific author. So that is the last thing we need to do here. We need to write the route that lets us go say go get all books by / some author's ID. Okay, so if we go back to our code here, we're back to our book router. We have a get all, but now let's do a get by author. So bookrouter.get / author ID. And we're going to ask it to go find a book, book.find, all books whose author property is equal to the rec.params.author ID. Right? And as we learned from the last lesson, when we were talking about queries and searching by genre, this will return a subarray, a smaller array of books that match this specific criteria. Okay, and there's the finished route. So books.find, all books have an author equal to the one we're sending through the parameters. If there's an error, handle it. If not, send us back the books. So this should be ready to go. Let's go back to Postman, books / and let's go grab all of Nancy's books, hopefully. So we're going to grab this author ID. We're going to come up here to books and hit send. And sure enough, there is Nancy's 2 books. If I delete her ID and go grab Joe's ID instead, I can do that get request and get Joe's 2 books. So this is great. Now on the front end, how would this look? Well, the user maybe they'd be presented with a page of authors that are listed out. And if they click on an author, it loads all of that author's books. So all that you would have to do is when you map out your authors in React, you make sure that that author's ID is in a click event. So when they click it, it goes and does a GET request to this endpoint, putting in their ID. That'll send back all of that author's books that you can then display to them. So a really nice way of doing that. One route will handle every author as long as this relationship is set up correctly. And as you see, it took very minimal work to set this up. The book just needs to know what do I belong to. It's an ID from this collection. And then when we save the book, we need to make sure that we're adding the author's ID to the new book so that it's saved in the database with that ID attached. That then allows us to do these cool GET requests where we say, hey, go get all of this type of data that has this specific property. Belongs to this author. And this is how you get things, as you'll see later with user authentication. Like Instagram, you make your own posts. You can go to your profile page and just see your own. You can go to the public page and see everyone else's. These kind of relationships is what powers that. All right. So this was our first look at database relationships in depth. We will hit it again in further episodes. But for now, get yourself some practice with this if you'd like. When you're ready, let's move on to the next episode where we'll look at a couple of the MongoDB methods. All right, we'll see you there.